We will begin with the Refuting Bodhicitta prayer. Sanje Chudan Sogi Chonam La Chancho Barado Dani Chapsum Je Dagi Jinso Gibe Sunam Je Drola Penjur Sanje Drobar Sho Sange Chudan Sogi Chonam La Chancho Barado Dani Japsum Je Dagi Jinso Gibe Sonam Je Drola Penjir Sanje Drobar Sho Sange Chudan Sogi Chonam Lam Chancho Barado Dani Japsum Je Dagi Jinso Gibe Sunam Je Drola Penjir Sanje Drobar Sho Sanjen Tamje Dewa Tan Dewe Judan Dembra Jurji Donga Dan Donga Je Judan Rawar Jurji Donga Mebe Dewa Tampa Tam Indra Jurji Yeren Chadan Nitan Rawe Tanyon Shembola Nebra Jurji. In the Dharma Expanse Palace of Akanishta, the essence of all Buddhas of the 3 times who shows me directly my mind is Dharmakaya. I prostrate to the glorious exalted Guru. Please bless me and all sentient beings that our minds become the Dharma. Bless us that the Dharma become the path. Bless us that the path dispel confusion. Bless us that confusion arise as wisdom. And so now please think to yourself that we are engaging in this study this afternoon, or whatever time it is for you who are watching, that we're engaging in this study now in order to bring all of our sentient beings, all our mothers from all of our previous lives. We're engaging in this study to bring them to liberation and omniscience, because the suffering they experience in this life, in any lifetime, any state of existence, is intolerable. And so the only way to truly bring benefit to them is to bring them to Buddhahood, which means that we need to achieve Buddhahood ourselves. So please listen, think to yourself that we are listening to the Dharma this afternoon with this intention. And the Dharma that we are listening to is the commentary on Vasubandhu's Treasury of the Abhidharma. This commentary by the Ninth Karmapa is entitled Youthful Play. And it has 8 chapters, just like the verses on the Treasury of Abhidharma. The verses on the Treasury I'm going to have a digression here. The verses on the Treasury of Abhidharma have 8 chapters. The auto-commentary has 9 chapters. And the reason for this is that first Vasubandhu wrote as I mentioned on the first day, he wrote the root verses, and then he taught it to his students, and they asked him to please write an auto-commentary, and he did. And he added an additional chapter on the end, a refutation of the individual, teachings about the individual. So that's not included in the verses, and it's generally not, when we have commentaries on the verses in Tibetan tradition, most of them do not include the 9th chapter. So most of them just have the 8 chapters, as does Wangchuk Dorje. So of the 8 chapters, the first 2 present the general presentation of all phenomena, and then the subsequent chapters present the 4 noble truths. And of the 4 noble truths, we're in the discussion of the first noble truth, the truth of suffering. And so what is suffering? Suffering is the result. The 5 aggregates that are the result of karma and afflictions. Those of you who were in our class last year might remember this, unless it's just been too long since that class happened. But the suffering is the 5 aggregates that are the result of karma and afflictions. So that would include our bodies and so forth when we're just sitting here not doing much. When you're actually engaged in an action, it might be a little bit different. But your bodies and your minds are basically the truth of suffering. The physical world that we see is the truth of suffering. So that's why we say that this chapter is teaching the truth of suffering, because it's teaching the world. And as we talked about the world, there are two meanings of it. It means the sentient beings. That's one meaning of the word loka in Sanskrit, or jikten in Tibetan. And the second meaning is the external environment. So here and these two form the main part of this chapter. So we're talking about the first of them, teachings on the sentient beings. And here, this also has 5 parts: the classifications of wanderers who are born, the nature of interdependence, the manner of birth, conditions for abiding after birth, the minds of staying and dying, and categorizing beings in 3 groups. So we are still in the discussion of the first, which has 3 parts: classifying in 3 realms, classifying wanderers in 5, and classifying in the 4 modes of birth. And so we are discussing the 4 modes of birth. Now, with the 4 modes of birth, after describing the 4 modes of birth, and it's necessary to say, well, what takes birth? And so for that reason, Vasubandhu then gives the description of the explanation of the between state. Then there's a third section, which is the manner in which it goes to the place of birth, the between state. So today we are talking about the explanation of the between state. We began that yesterday, and there's talking about what is the essence of the between state, the dispelling doubts and proof. So there's one point about the essence that's really important to understand. So we have to think, well, if we're going to identify what is the bardo, what is the between state? What is it? It's the 5 defiled aggregates, basically the form, feeling, conception, formation, and consciousness, between the moment of death and the moment of conception, or it's translated in here as rebirth linking. So it's basically that whole point. It's the 5 defiled aggregates. So you aren't going to find any bardo independent of the form, feeling, conception, formation, and consciousness. It's not like this, it's this separate thing. It's just a different stage. It's the continuum of experience. It's that continuum of the 5 aggregates from one moment until the next. And in that sense, it's really not different from this lifetime, which we call here, what do we call it? Previous state. Previous state. Previous, what is it previous to? Death. Okay, so in the previous state, we have the continuum of the 5 aggregates: form, feeling, conception, formation. So there's nothing else that we can find that makes up ourselves. And it's the same in the bardo. We can't find anything that is the previous state other than these. There's no time other than them. There's no state other than, it's not some sort of a separate thing. It is actually just a different way of thinking about the 5 aggregates, really. The 5 defiled aggregates. And it's the same with the between state, or the bardo. So that's an important point, to remember that we're not talking about anything other than the 5 aggregates. We're just thinking about them in a different way. Okay? So yesterday we spoke about that, and one of the reasons why I didn't really go on that last night is there's more about yesterday's, because there's more that we will come to today that kind of clarifies that a little bit. So yesterday, what we talked about at the end of the session were the proofs for why there is the bardo, and in particular the proofs, the refutations of the ideas of some of the other Buddhist schools, the Mahasangika and Mahashashika schools. These names are, if you can't catch what I'm saying, you just look on page 224. It's there, Mahasangika, Mahashashika. Okay. So there's the logical proof refuting their analogy of a mirror, and so that was enough for that. So now we come on to the scriptural proofs. And so the scriptural proofs are mentioned in we're on the top of page 226. Since mentioned it exists, sent eaters, and 5 are taught in Sutra of Wanderers. So since mentioned it exists, it could also be, it's mentioned in songs, actually. It's a little bit more literal. So it's not necessarily in sutras, but in other things it's mentioned that there's a bardo, a between state. So that's one reason. The other thing is that if you don't accept those songs, there are also mention of scent eaters, or Gandharvas. You probably have heard the word Gandharva if you've been reading Buddhist things long enough, the celestial beings, but it also refers to beings in the between state. And then 5 are taught, which is it means that there are 5 different types of non-returner are taught. And then it's also mentioned in a sutra called the Sutra of Wanderers. So that's the root text, just these 2 lines. And there's a fairly long description of this root text here. So here, to read this, it says, the great Chim summarized it thus. So the great Chim means Chim Jambayang. There are several Chims who were actually experts in the Abhidharma. Chim is a region, and I think so Chim Jambayang is very common in Tibetan to call people after their regions. So Chim Jambayang is the author of the great commentary. And he summarized it as saying, the 7 states in entering the womb, Ashvalayana, and non-returners, Sutra of Wanderers, in other words, explain it, so the between state is taught to be. So here he's mentioning several different scriptures that all mention the between state. So if you don't accept the songs, so it is mentioned in some various songs and so forth, then it's explained in other sutras, so you should accept the sutras as well. So to continue with Wangchuk Dorje's commentary, to comment on this, from the Sutra of 7 states, the states are 7. The states of hell, the state of animals, the state of hungry ghosts, the state of gods, the state of humans, the karmic state, and the between state. So here there's a sutra that actually mentions it. Now, one of the things that happened in ancient India is that when the Buddhist tradition spread, and at first it didn't spread so widely until the time of the Emperor Ashoka, and then after that it eventually split into 18 different foundational schools, the 18 schools of the foundation vehicle. And one of these is the Theravada school, which is now in the primary school in Thailand and Sri Lanka and Burma and other parts of Southeast Asia. Then another is the Sarvastivada school that later became called the Great Exposition, and then we had the Mahasangika and various other schools, the Dharmaguptaka school, which is the Vinaya tradition that spread to China, and so forth. There are 18 different schools. And if you start researching the 18 different schools, you'll see that actually there are even 4 or 5 different presentations of all 18 different schools. So we're not going to get into detail on that right now. What's important to know, though, is that the scriptures that each different school taught, they each preserved scriptures. And originally, when the Buddhist scriptures were preserved, they weren't written down at first. They weren't written down until much later. And so people would memorize the scriptures. You would learn them, and this is much more common back in the day, shall we say, back at the time. In the times BC, there are lots of people who memorized large numbers of sutras and scriptures and Vinaya, volumes and volumes worth of material that they memorized. And it wasn't as extraordinary as we think it is now, because everyone did it. They used the muscles in their brain, they used the muscles of their mind, and were actually able to memorize things. They didn't have Google, so they couldn't be lazy. We have Google. We have search tools. It's even worse now than it was back when I was young, back in the day, when you had to look up things in books and you had to actually go into a library and find things on the stacks. Wow, so long ago. And now we're just lazy. You don't know something, you Google it. So for that reason, they were memorized at that time. And because they were memorized, different traditions, maybe no one who had memorized a particular sutra went down in the Theravada school. Some of the Theravada sutras aren't in our tradition. Maybe no one who had memorized that sutra went into Kashmir, whatever. So this is just how it happened. So we see that the earliest scriptures found was a cache of scriptures found in what used to be the kingdom of Gandharva, which is, I believe, in like the areas of Pakistan and Afghanistan, that area. I'm not exactly certain right where it is, but there are some Buddhist scriptures that were found that date to like the 1st or 2nd century BC. And these include some Mahayana sutras. Now, the Pali scriptures, which people used to think they were the ones that were written down first, they weren't written down to a little bit later than that, the earliest known examples of writing them. So you can't really say that one's earlier than the other. They're kind of just different traditions that passed. So for that reason, when you see that different traditions have different positions, it's not that one is good and the other is bad. It's that they had different traditions, that different words of the Buddha. The Buddha taught differently in different sutras to different people. And because he taught differently, then different teachings got spread to different places. There are details that are different. So that's the main reasons, what I think is probably the main reason why some schools accept that there's a between state and some don't. Some just didn't memorize those sutras. But even in their sutras, even in the Theravada sutras, they'll admit that the Buddha talks about Gandharvas, the scent eaters. So with that description, so that's basically saying that in that sutra, the Sutra of the Seven States, it does explicitly mention the between state. So therefore, since it is actually mentioned in the Buddha's teachings, that the between state exists. That's what Wangchuk Dorje says. Now, the people in the other school says, well, we don't have any sutras like that, they say. We do not recite any sutra like that because it does not appear in our scriptures, you say. Okay, so that's the issue. They just hadn't they hadn't had that transition to those scriptures. So then we have a different scripture. Now, all of these scriptural citations that are given here also appear in Vasubandhu's auto commentary. So this is this is back from the original tradition. So from the manifestation of three situations, the child is conceived in the mother's womb. A suitable mother who has a menstrual flow. This is kind of, Datsen is the Tibetan world. It's like the Tibetan sign. It's the monthly sign, Datsen, right? But maybe I'm really wondering I'm not sure if they actually meant the menstrual flow or if they actually meant ovulation. Anyways, that's kind of a modern day sort of picayune question. The parents becoming lustful and joining, and the scent eater also being nearby. So scent eater in Sanskrit is Gandharva, someone who eats scent. Gandha means scent, so Gandharva is a scent eater. The scent eater also being nearby. And there is a sutra like this in the Theravada. I was reading a book on karma and rebirth from Theravada, a writer whose name I don't remember. But it mentions also that they're Gandharvas. So the scent eater mentioned here is just a synonym for the between state. When you see the word Gandharva, it has two meanings. One is a type of celestial being, and the other is between state. Also, it is said in the Ashvalayana Sutra, your scent eater who is nearby, and so forth. So we do not recite any such sutras. We don't have those sutras, you say. From another sutra, here's another quote. The non-returners are five. Complete nirvana in the intermediate, complete nirvana upon birth, complete nirvana without effort, complete non-nirvana with effort, and bound for hire. So here we have a non-returner. This is speaking about the four different types of noble individuals according to the foundation vehicle. You have a stream enterer. That means someone who has seen the nature of the Four Noble Truths. Then the next level is a once returner. So once returner is someone who has eliminated half of the obscurations that bind them to the desire realm. And because they've eliminated half, then in their next lifetime, they'll be able to eliminate the rest of them. So they're only going to return to the desire realm once, hence the name once returner. It's kind of a funny English word, but it means something. When you know what it means, it helps you remember what it's talking about. Then you've got the non-returner. The non-returner has eliminated all of the afflictions of the desire realm. So in their next lifetime, they're either going to the form realm or they're going to the formless realm, and there are 5 different alternatives. One is that they'll have complete nirvana in the intermediate. So this is really the best of them. They're going to die, they go into the between state, and then they achieve nirvana without remainder in the between state. Then the second is nirvana on birth. It's like The example given in the auto commentary is like when you're striking iron and the sparks fly off. There's some that fly up in the sky and they go away in the sky. That's like the one who achieves nirvana in the intermediate state. Then some fly up and then they touch the ground and they immediately go out. Then that's like a nirvana on the birth. Then there are some who are reborn in the form or formless realm, and they're able to achieve nirvana without doing any work. That's nirvana without effort. Then there's some who have to do some more training. They're the ones nirvana with effort. And bound for higher means that they've been born in like the first jhana, and then they're going to have to go from the first jhana to the second jhana to the third jhana and so forth, up in order. So those are the 5 different ones. These are described in greater detail later in, but the important point here is that it mentions the intermediate state. Okay? So you can kind of file the other types of non-returners in your mind. Just remember, what you need to remember here is that non-returners there's a big variety of non-returners, and some of them will achieve nirvana in the intermediate state. Okay, that's the important point here. So here 5 non-returners are taught. And it is proven in the Sutra, the 7 Holy Wanderers. So this also is another sutra that proves the state of these beings. The word "and" means that in addition to the logical proofs, there are the above scriptures and many other scriptures that prove it. So basically there's a word "and" an extra word "and." And this is kind of going back to the Sanskrit grammar. In the Sanskrit grammar, you can put the word after any word in a list. You can put it after the first word, you can put it after the last word, you can put it after a word in the middle. Usually it's after the first or the last. So they're basically just saying that "and" includes the logical proofs. So there are lots of proofs that say that for showing why it exists. There's also another scripture quotation that comes, and this says, "Put dhyanas in 4 groups of 10, the formless in 3 groups of 7, conception in 1 group of 6, and all is put in categories." Okay, so I'm not going to go into the details here because you're not going to remember the details. The point is that each of these, when you talk about the jhanas, we have the jhana, right? Usually we talk about 4 jhanas, but you can talk about them in 10 as well, and one of those mentions the between state. Likewise, when you talk about the formless, the 3 groups of 7, the between state is mentioned there, and in the categories of conception. So that's the point of this. What's included in the 10 and the 7 and the 6 the between state is included in each of those categories, so therefore it has to exist. And if you want to look at this in detail, which is not necessary right now, the point is that that the between state is mentioned in there. So those are the stories in the sutra that kind of prove it, but then the opponents will have an idea. It's like, well, wait a minute. There's stories of beings who go directly to hell without any intermediate state, aren't there? So it said, well, it is said that the demon named Criticism went directly to the incessant hell in 1 instant in his own body. So there is no between state. So the story is that this demon was enveloped by on the earth, was enveloped by flames from hell and went straight down into hell. There's a similar story about Devadatta when Devadatta passed away, that he was enveloped by the flames of hell and brought down into the hells. And so here the opponent is saying here, but wait a minute, he went straight to hell with no between state. So the response from this is, the opponent also said, it is also said that if you commit a heinous misdeed, you will be born in hell immediately with nothing in between. For example, if you have killed your mother, father, and arhat, drawn blood from the Buddha with malicious intent, or caused a schism in the Sangha, these are the 5 heinous acts. The Sanskrit word means anantara. It means nothing in between. And if you have done those, then you're going to go straight to the incessant hell upon death. is what it says. So therefore, because you're going straight to hell after death, there can't be an intermediate state. So the explanation in the Great Exposition School is these do not mean that there is no between state, but rather while still alive the body is surrounded by the flames of hell, and one dies. You burn to death in this lifetime, and then go to hell in the between state. So the flames of hell come up, they burn you to a crisp, you die, and then in the between state you go straight there and you fall headfirst into hell. That's basically, and then you're reborn in hell once you're there. Okay, so there's that state. It might be a short between state, but it's a between state. It takes time. Basically, you're saying the continuum takes time to go down to hell. So that's the description of the demon named criticism. And the latter also means that it is karma experienced on rebirth without any other intervening existence. In other words, without taking another birth. Remember that the between state is not considered a wanderer. They haven't yet got to their destination. So it's basically saying that when the person who has committed the 5 heinous misdeeds dies in this lifetime, then they will not go to any other realm than the incessant hell. They'll still go through the between state that takes them to the incessant hell, but they will, but there is that between state. It's also the same that they still have the entire remainder of this lifetime. It's not like you commit your mother and then you just sort of dematerialize. What do you have? I'm sorry, I'm going to have to give a 1990s example. They beam you down to the incessant hell. It's not like that. You don't just go straight. You've killed your mother, your mom's dead, and there you're gone. No. You still live out the remainder of your lifetime, and it's when you die. So it doesn't mean immediate. It means that there's no other birth in between. That's what we mean by the anantara in the Sanskrit. Now in English, that's a very difficult word to translate. The nothing in between, the no between. So I just usually translate it as heinous for that, but the actual Sanskrit term for those. But we'll talk about those later. That's in the next chapter. So with regard to one sinful Brahmin, when youth has been carried away, there's aging and sickness, the demons approach. There is no place for you. There are no provisions for your journey. So here's a quote where they're talking to some wicked Brahmin saying that you're going to die, and you haven't done anything. There's nowhere else for you to go. You haven't got any provisions for the journey, nothing to sustain you. You're just going straight to the lower realms. So this says literally that there's no place for you in the third line. So although this says there's no place in between, or between there's no place, this means that between that life and the lower realms, there's no place of verse in the higher realms. So what it's saying is that when you are wicked in this lifetime, you can't expect to take a detour to the God realm for a life or two before you go down to the lower realms. If you've got the karma, if your bad karma is such that it's going to ripen in your next lifetime. So it's not teaching that there is no between state. However, when one is born from desire or form into formless, there is no between state. Interesting, because you're not going anywhere, right? The formless doesn't have a realm of its own. You just die, and then you're in that formless meditation wherever you were. If where makes any sense when you have no body, when you have no form. So the distinctions of bodily form. So when we talk about the between state, then the between state, we say it has the 5 aggregates. So what do we mean? How do we talk about it having the 5 aggregates? So we have to talk about the distinctions of bodily form and so forth. So just 5 topics. Distinctions of the body, distinctions of miracles, that is, their various supernatural powers, distinctions of faculties, of the manner of going, and of food. These are the 5. So the first is the distinctions of the body. And there are 3 points here. The actual is saying on the bottom of page 227, since it is propelled by the same karma, it has the body of the next. Now here, actually, on the second line, I've been, one of the reasons for doing this class is I got to review an old translation. So when you look at body, that what translated as body, it actually is more like the body shape or the body image, the appearance of the next lifetime. So what it's saying is that the between state is propelled by the same karma as the upcoming birth. And therefore, you have the same bodily form as in the next birth. So if you have the karma to be reborn in hell, you are going to have the bodily form, the shape of appearance of a hell being in the between state. If you have the karma to be born a god, you will have a god's form. If you have the karma to be reborn an ant, you'll have an ant's form. This is according to the Great Exposition School. This is different than is taught in the Tantras. Those of you who have studied the bardos and the Tantras, it talks about you gradually transition from one to the next, and that through each week in the bardo you are less and less human and more like what you're going to be reborn as. But here it says that the same karma is propelling, so according to the sutras of the Great Exposition School, you have the same. If you're going to be reborn a sheep in your next lifetime, you will find yourself in the bardo as a sheep, looking like a sheep. Since the between state is a corporeal sentient being, so there's a body. It's a mental body, but it's a body, propelled by the one same propelling karma as the upcoming previous state. It has the same body shape and form of the next previous state that will arise. So the base is the same shape and form. You're going to look like a sheep, or a pig, or an alligator, or a termite, or whatever it is that you're going to be born in your next life if you haven't gathered enough merit. So then here it mentions here it has the same body of the next. And here, because it didn't really fit in the English, the Tibetan actually says literally the next previous state. And so I kind of moved it down to the next line. So the next previous state, and I'm not sure if that was a good translation decision or not, but it's one that I made 10 years ago, so I have to live with it now until I make a next edition. The previous is prior to death, but onward for the moment of birth. So we've been talking about these four states. The between state we've had a lot of discussion about, and we've mentioned the previous state a few times. So what is the previous state? It is prior to death, but onward from the moment of birth. From the moment you're born until the moment you die. So that's the previous state, previous to death. Well then, what is the previous state itself, you ask? The previous state is the continuum of the 5 aggregates of grasping. Does that sound familiar? 5 aggregates of grasping. 5 aggregates of grasping is the same thing as saying the 5 defiled aggregates. 5 aggregates of grasping in Tibetan is Niwara Lempe Pumpo Nga. Grasping here means the afflictions, the 5 afflicted aggregates, defiled aggregates. So it is the continuum of the 5 aggregates of grasping themselves prior to the state of death, but onward from the moment of the state of death. So in other words, it's essentially the same thing as the bardo state. It's still the 5 aggregates, the 5 defiled aggregates. It's just appearing to us differently. So we have 4 states, and therefore, among the 4 states, the between state and the previous state have been explained. Then we have the state of birth is the moment of rebirth linking as a new being. So rebirth linking, this is Ningsam Jarwa in Tibetan, Ningsam Jarwa. And so that means basically joining. It's like joining, into a new body. And normally in English, what we'd call this the moment of conception. So this is another kind of translation issue. Do you use the English word conception, which people are going to say is that. But the word conception in English, people think made new. That's kind of because we take that word primarily from the Christian idea of it, and conception in the Christian idea is like brand new being, brand new soul, brand new being. So you say the moment of conception. If you talk about it in materialist terms, like the moment of conception, it's just these physical things coming together to make a new zygote. Or is it an embryo? Anyways, make a new zygote or embryo, the zygote at that time. And it's not yet even a being. It doesn't become really a being until later, according to some people's. So it's like this idea of this new being that hasn't existed before. So that's why I chose not to use conception here, to use rebirth linking. You're linking the 5 aggregates from one birth to the next. from the bardo state to the next. The last moment of death is a state of death. It is what occurs before the between state for those who will take birth among sentient beings with form. So you've got that moment. And at the moment of death, what is the state of death? It's the 5 aggregates. Could it be anything other than the 5 aggregates? When you've got the moment of rebirth linking, it's the 5 aggregates, right? So it's all the 5 aggregates. When someone says, what is the between state? You'd say it's the 5 aggregates in between the moment of death and the moment of the next birth. What is the... I mean, yeah, you can say, sure, a lot in conversation we're going to say it's the time in between the two. But what is that time? Time is, as it says back in the first chapter, time is the aggregates, it's the 5 aggregates. So these states is not something other than the 5 aggregates, the form, feeling, conception, formation, and consciousness. They're all the same thing. This is an important point for just kind of remembering. And this will become clearer why it's important in the coming days. Thus, the states of birth and death are moments, and the other 2 states are continuum. So it's that one, birth and death are single moments, and the state of, and the other 2 are continuum. Now, when we look at this in the Tantra teachings that you may have had, we talk about 6 different types, 6 different bardos, right? We talk about the bardo of this life, the bardo of samadhi, the bardo of dying, the chinigi bardo ra. Bardo, oh, I missed bardo of sleep. Bardo of this lifetime, bardo of samadhi, bardo of dreams, bardo of dying, the bardo of the dharmata, and then the karmic bardo of becoming, which leads you to your next birth, right? So that talks about 6, but that's a tantric presentation. So when you have different presentations coming from different schools, most of you who have studied about the bardos, you've heard about it from the tantric perspective. That's kind of describing it in a different way, and describing in particular the phases of dissolution and so forth in much more detail than it goes into the sutras. So it's a slightly different conceptual framework than here in the sutra teaching. It doesn't mean that one is better or worse. It's like they're just different teachings on how it works. There's something to be learned in both of them. So when you look at it from one perspective, you can say 6. When you look at it from the other perspective, you say 4. So here we're talking about it from the sutra perspective. So we're talking about these 4 different phases, these 4 different states. So it's just a difference in presentation. It's not in any way contradictory. The tantric presentation is just more detailed about the processes. And then what they are seen, how do we know that they're intermediate beings? Well, they can be seen. We ordinary beings, we ordinary humans are not able to see them, but other beings can. They're seen by their own class and divine eye. So that means that bardo beings can see other bardo beings who are in the same class. And they're also seen by beings who have developed the clairvoyance of the divine eye. Divine eye is one of the 6 types of clairvoyance. The 6 types of clairvoyance are described in, is it the 7th or the 8th chapter? I think the 8th chapter. They, the between states of hell, are seen by hell beings, and the between states of gods are seen by gods of their comparable class. And that also goes for between states of hungry ghosts are seen by hungry ghosts, between other hungry ghosts in the between state, right? So beings in the between state can see those who are in the same level of the between state, the 5 classes of wanderers. And they are seen by the clairvoyance of divine eye that is produced by meditation and free of the 11 faults. So if you do dhyana meditation, you develop the clairvoyances, and you don't have the 11 faults that are listed below, then you can see the intermediate state, the beings in the intermediate state. They are not seen by the extremely pure divine eye attained upon birth. So if you achieve the divine eye because you happen to have been born in the form realm, for example, then you can't see the between state. It's what comes out of meditation, because you have to have a pretty strong one. So it has to be free of the 11 faults. And these are as follows. They're doubt and inattention, a body that's unworkable, and torpor, sleep, and agitation, harsh diligence and crooked mind, anxiety and various conceptions, too talkative, harsh meditation. Basically, if you have problems in your meditation, if you have faults in your meditation, then you're going to be, then even if you develop the clairvoyances, you can have some clairvoyance, but you won't be able to see the divine, the between state. Some say that those, and most of these are pretty understandable. Basically, it's saying that if your meditation, if you're too tight or too lax in your meditation, if you're not paying attention, or if your body is too tight, if it's unworkable, these are normal meditation faults. Harsh diligence, if you're trying too hard. Some say that those in the between state of the gods can see the between states of all 5 wonders, and those in the intermediate states of humans, hunger, ghosts, and animals cannot see the higher ones. So this is just a different position, saying that if you're going to be reborn as a god, you can also see the beings in other realms. Now, the beings in the between state are different than us in that they're not kind of anchored towards a coarse physical body like ours. And so for that reason, they can have miraculous powers. And these are described here, the distinctions of miracles. The miracles of karma have power. Actually, this is another line that I realized this morning is a little bit off. They have strong power, karmic powers of miracles. I'm not sure how to phrase it in the end, but basically it's saying that the bardo beings have have strong miracles because of their karma. Okay? So the bardo beings have strong miracles because of karma. They have the miracles of being able to fly in space and so forth out of the force of karma. So because of karma, they can go through space easily. They can go to places by thinking of them and so forth. They're very unstable in that way, actually. And they have power. They're not emanated miracles. And these are miracles that no one can stop. No one can turn back. Not even the Buddha can stop a bardo being or a being in the in-between state from going where they're going to go because it is by the force of karma that they have these powers. Otherwise, how would you be able, if the in-between state didn't have these miracles of karma, how would it be able to go to some distant realm? It has to be able to go quickly and miraculously from one to the other. So if you're going to be born, if you're in this galaxy now, and then you're going to be, when you pass away from this lifetime, if you're going to be reborn in some totally other galaxy, and it's going to happen in a reasonably short amount of time, you have to go faster than the speed of light, basically. You can only do that if you have miraculous powers. Otherwise, you're going to be violating special relativity. Or is it general relativity? I can't remember which. Distinction of faculties. Full facultied, that is, they have all the faculties. They have full and complete faculties of the eye and so forth. So here we have to review a little bit because, in our studio audience we have some people who were here last year, but some were not. So what are the faculties? Among the 5 aggregates, what aggregate are the faculties? Are they form, feeling, conception, formation, or consciousness? Form, right. So the faculties are form. Like we're talking about the sensory faculties, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body. No, I'm missing one. Eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body. Yeah, that's 5. Okay. I thought I was missing one. What? We're talking about 5 sensory faculties right now. We can also be talking about any of the 22 faculties, but right now let's focus on the 5 sensory faculties, eye. When we talk about the faculty of the eye, what are we referring to? Are we referring to this physical organ of the eye? No. I see several of you shaking your heads. No. It's like is said in the first chapter, it says, the eye, etc., lucid forms. So they're different, they're physical, but they're more like forms of light or forms of energy or something. And they're traditionally said to be shaped like the eye is shaped, and I have to look this up just to make sure that I say this right, because I don't want to say something wrong. I could try to do it from memory, but I'd muck one up. So I'm going to do it from looking at the earlier chapter. As it says in chapter 1, verse 9, C and D, supports of consciousnesses are the eye, etc., lucid form. The shapes of each of the faculties, from the eye faculty, the body faculty, are in the succession. Flax, that means a flax flower, a knot of birch. So you know how like a knot on a birch, it's kind of like the shape of the cochlea inside the ear. But the cochlea is physical, so it's like some sort of energetic thing or a light thing that's inside that. The ordinary people can't see, according to the scriptures. The scientists cannot see it with their microscope. Why not? Because they have not achieved dhyana. If you want to be able to see this to be able to evaluate this on a scientific level, you need to first see if you can develop the dhyana meditations, and then you can look and see if it's right. If you try to do this experiment without developing dhyana first, you're going to fail, right? If you want to prove the between state, or if you want to disprove the between state, then you have to develop the capacity that is taught to be able to see it. If you are going to be able to prove that there are electrons in something, you have to develop machines that are able to perceive it, right? You have to do something to make yourself able to see it. Train yourself to be able to see them, right? It's the same thing with all these things that we're not talking about. If you don't bother to even try developing the dhyana meditations, you just say, it's impossible, there's no way, it can't be. You can't actually say that that's true because you haven't even tried. So people say, say, this can't be, scientists can't see them. Well, scientists haven't done the training. They're willing to build huge particle accelerators, and they're not willing to spend a couple years learning how to do dhyana meditation. I mean, really. If some materialist scientists, there are some non-materialist scientists, if a materialist scientist comes to us and says, you can't see that, I'm going to say, go back, do your dhyana meditation, see if it's possible. Send some graduate students over to Southeast Asia where they still practice the dhyanas and see if they can develop the capacity to see it or not. Then you come back and tell me. And unless you do that, you of course can't prove it. It's like you're trying to look for cells and you're not using a microscope. Okay, that's my rant for the day. So the flax, the knot of birch is the ear, the copper needles, these are in the nose, in the nasal, in the sinuses, I guess. A half moon, that's the tongue, around the edges of the tongue. And fur that is soft to the touch, but that pervades the entire body, the bodily faculty. So these are fine forms. So the bardo being has all these 5 faculties. So what are the 5 faculties? They're form, right? So the bardo being, that's the aspect of form for the bardo being. One of the aspects of form for the bardo being, right? And unobstructive. Nothing can stop them. The distinctions of the manner of going, they can move, they go places, they're unobstructive, full facultied and unobstructive, they cannot turn back, they cannot be blocked by even a vajra and so forth because they're unobstructive, they can go anywhere. For example, if you melt and smash a ball of iron, vermin can be seen inside of it. So apparently back in India, people would melt iron and see bugs inside of the iron. This is interesting. Once the between state of a human, for example, is established, it cannot turn back into a god or other wanderer. So they cannot turn back. Nothing can stop you. Once you have the karma to be reborn in a rebirth state and to be reborn if your karma propels you into the between state of a god, you are definitely going to be reborn as a god. If your karma propels you into the birth state of a human, you're definitely going to be born a human, and so forth for all 5 of the classes of wanderers. In the higher Abhidharma, that is in the Mahayana Abhidharma, based on the teachings of Asanga and the Bodhisattva levels and various other texts, reversal to a higher between state is accepted. But here in the Great Exposition, it's not. So no matter what, once you've got that, once you've at the moment of your death, the karma propels you into the between state, one of the 5 classes of the between state. You've got no choice. You can't stop it. The karma, just as your karma gives you miraculous powers that no one else can turn back, you also are unable to resist them. Distinctions of food: they eat smells. They, the beings in the between state of desire, eat the subtle smells of food because they do not eat coarse food. And because they don't have coarse material bodies such as we do, they have more of a subtle body. Those of lower classes with limited faculties eat smells that are not nice. Those with developed faculties eat nice smells. So in other words, if you're going to be reborn as in the hells of the hungry ghosts or the animals, you're only going to encounter disgusting smells. If you're going to be reborn as a human, you'll get pretty good smells, and if you're going to be reborn as a god, it's going to be really nice for the time being. How long does a being stay in the between state, you ask? There are many different propositions by the Venerable Dharmatani of the Sutra School, the second teacher Vasubandhu, Venerable Vasumitra in the Great Exposition School, Sanghabhadra, and so forth. So these are all masters of the Abhidharma. But to summarize them with verses from my own Tika. So this is a reference to the 8th Karmapa's great commentary, the very long one. And there are these verses are found in there. The venerable elders of the Sutra school say the between state has an indefinite duration. So there's no fixed duration. According to the Sutra school, there's no fixed duration. You can't say that it is going to be 49 days, exactly. They say indefinite. Some people it's 1, some people 1 day, some people it's 100 years. It doesn't matter. It can be anything. It depends on your own karma. If a being with provisions for 100 years spends a year in between, once he's eaten that years, he has only enough for some 99 more in the previous state. By that logic, it's known. So if someone has, for example, some being has the karma to be reborn as a human in the Rose Apple land, or Jambudvipa in the Rose Apple land, 100-year lifetime. But they spend a year in the between state, then they've only got 99 left once they're born, right? That's what it's saying. Vasumitra says if the conditions are met within 7 days, or if not, after saying 7 days, there's migration. So it depends on your karma. If the conditions come together, then you are reborn quickly. If not, then you have to then you migrate or you take rebirth after 7 more days. If the conditions are still not met, one can remain 7 weeks. So it's like 7 weeks is the maximum. Some certain proponents of the certain sutra school and Venerable Asanga say so forth say definitely they will not stay longer than just 7 weeks. So these teachers say that it's a maximum of 49 days, 7 weeks. The Great Exposition say if the conditions, the Great Exposition says if the conditions for one to be quickly reborn are not met, for example, if horses are not in mating season, by karma conditions will ripen and cause copulation, and they will link rebirth in there. So you have the karma to be reborn a horse, and say you die today. It's not mating season for horses. I don't know when mating season. I'm not a horse person. I would imagine that horses probably are in mating season, and most large animals like that go into estrus in the fall. So let's just take that as a given. So if you die now, but you have the karma that you're definitely going to be reborn a horse, then somehow a horse is going to be, even out of mating season, is going to be able to get pregnant, I guess is what I'm saying. Or maybe it's going off into another world where there are horses who are in season, because it's, I don't know. But basically it's saying that there's a different karma that takes you to the different places. So because the conditions that produce our rebirth come because of the karma. So here, this is the difference between what we're talking about in these sutra presentations, and there are all sorts of different ideas in the sutra and in the tantric tradition. Actually, even in the tantric tradition, when we talk about 49 days, and we have the tradition in the Tibetan, among Tibetan Buddhists of doing pujas every day for 7 weeks, or every 7th day for 7 weeks. This is still actually considered just an average. So it's really hard to tell. It's basically depending upon your karma and aspirations and so forth. So that is enough for today. And the main point that I just want to stress again is that we're talking about what is the bardo, what is the previous state, what is the state of death, what is a state of birth. We have got these 4 states that kind of include all of our different existences. It's the 5 aggregates. You cannot find anything separate. There's no part of your existence that's not included in the 5 aggregates. This is an important point to keep in mind. So when you're asked, what is the between state? Or if someone says, what is this life? It's your 5 aggregates in this lifetime. There's nothing else. So that's the important point for today. So now we will dedicate the merit. Sunam di tamje sikpani topne nyebe dranam pamje ne kyega nachi bala trukpai sibe tsole drowa drolwa risho chancho semjo rimboje magye banam ye jurji kyeba nyamba meba yang gonne gondu pelwa sho.